And welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here to serve you. I'm joined this evening also by Cindy Lincoln. Many of you know who she is, so she needs no introduction.
Hi, guys.
Yes, hi everybody. So let me just try to get all the buttons squared away. It's actually quite an ordeal to get even the intro credits going. And I'm going to monitor here the chat. So let me get that going here. And so greetings to you all. Let me try to acknowledge everyone. So we have, let me see who's here. We have Mr. Wilford, who is a geologist. We have Matt and David Neff and Godzilla Freak, Kevin Colvin. Mr. Wilford, it's been a long time, and I should think and pray for you more. One of the last times we interacted, my mom is still alive, and goodness, that was the last week that she was alive that we talked to each other. So both you and I, brother, been through a lot. So it's really great to see you, and may the Lord help both of us through the next year. So tonight, Dapper Dino has been asking me, Salvador, why are you a Young Earth Creationist? So a little bit about me. I actually wasn't a Young Earth Creationist all of my life. I was raised in a Catholic home, and that's where I learned about Christian doctrine. I'm Protestant now, Reformed Evangelical specifically. I was raised in a Catholic home, and I learned evolution and basically the mainstream theory in high school. I started to have a little bit of doubts, partly metaphysical. I said, how can consciousness evolve? And after I became, I believe I became saved at age 15, just listening to the scriptures on Sunday masses, and then also I had a New Testament. I knew something had changed in my heart. And so I was a theistic evolutionist for about a year or two, and then I just ran into some materials that suggested the difficulty of abiogenesis. So on that basis, I actually rejected both abiogenesis and evolutionary theory. You know, it's a little more subtle. I understand now the distinction now that I'm much farther along in my understanding, but I identified as a creationist at that point, and I'd identified as an Old Earth Creationist. And I had read Robert Jastro's book, God and the Astronomers, and I was very impressed. I was very enamored with the Big Bang Theory, and so the information I think that I got that converted me to actually being an Old Earth Creationist is from the Institute of Creation Research. And as like around my first year of college or so, I began to kind of resent what they said against the Big Bang. They seemed to trivialize the work of Albert Einstein and a lot of the astronomers. And so, like a lot of people, I had other things to worry about than the age of the universe, okay? Because life is hard in this world, and you're just trying to sort it out, and that's just like, well, okay. That wasn't a priority, deciding whether the universe is old or young. That didn't seem particularly relevant to where I was as a human being. So sometime around 2001, when my dad was diagnosed as terminally ill, I had a crisis of faith, like a lot of people would. Kept praying for his healing, and it never happened. And I began to think, well, maybe I'm just praying to a brick wall. That being said, I had bouts of agnosticism, but it's not like I was a total unbeliever, because I believe I've seen miracles in my life. At age 12, even before I became a Christian, I had a vision in church. And so, and I feel I've seen miracles and answered prayers. I met Charles Duke, who had went to the moon, the youngest man to walk on the moon. And when he got back to Earth, he became a Christian because his life was in shambles. But he noticed his wife, who was going through a lot, became a Christian, and he noticed the difference in the way she was living and the attitude and the spirit in her heart. And that motivated him to go with her on a Christian retreat. He became a Christian. Sometime thereafter, he organized a prayer meeting. He prayed for a blind girl. She got miraculously healed. To me, that's a credible witness. And there was a time my mother was in a car accident. They said she'd never walk again. The Presbyterian Church in America, Presbyterian minister came to my mother's hospital bed, prayed for her. That afternoon, she started to get movement in her leg. She was able to walk again, eventually. And so, again, it's not like God wasn't hinting his presence. And so that relates to where I'm at. I'm, in a sense, I encounter lots of young Earth creationists who've had their beliefs deconstructed, and they, some of them remain Christians, but they're no longer young Earth creationists. Some of them leave the faith, become agnostics. In extreme cases, some of them become atheists. So there's a whole spectrum of what happens after deconstruction. But in a sense, I was never deconstructed. I was never constructed as a YEC to begin with, as a young Earth creationist. Now, there are varieties of or levels of young Earth creationism, and there's some subtleties. It's especially prominent in the Seventh-day Adventist movement. They believe the Earth is young, but some of them believe life is young. They're not committed to the age of the solar system or the universe as the whole. So they're young. I would classify them as young life creationists. And a young fossil record creationist is not really even a term, but it's kind of something I put forward that's kind of in line with the idea, okay, we have to decompose parts of young Earth creationism or young cosmos creationism into little parts. And that's a significant part, because hypothetically, you could have an old universe and a young fossil record. So the two don't necessarily go together. So Cindy, while I try to get some of the stuff set up, could you share about your walk in the faith?
Yeah, that'd be great. I didn't realize you were the one who coined that term about young fossils and segregating that from creationism. That's interesting. And you forgot to mention that one of the spectrum of experiences in quote deconstruction is actually construction. Those are my favorite stories. Scientists that were atheists or were agnostic and became young Earth creationists through science. But anyway, I was raised in a public school. I was raised in a home where they didn't pray, or I don't even think there was a Bible in the home. Whenever I got into my teenage years, they started going to a unity church, and I had a little card that had the Lord's Prayer and the 23rd Psalm. And if I ever picked up a Bible, I really couldn't understand it. I remember reading the Psalms where he talks about our enemies. And I'm like, I don't have any enemies. I don't know what this book is about. Now I do. But anyway, when I was in college, I loved creation. I loved the meadows, the streams, the mountains, and I was a geography major. And I was in a geology class with a Young Earth Creationist, and she turned me on to the scriptures and basically discipled me. But it's wow, there were several influences. It's hard to pinpoint. I do remember the hour I first believed, and it wasn't through science. It was through the historicity of Jesus. When I realized that Jesus was not like Zeus or Thor, that he was actually historical. And then I came to believe that he was actually the creator come to earth. And that was so exciting. I never lost the zeal for that. And then, even though I became a believer in Jesus, I was like you were saying about, well, I have better things to fight about than if the earth is old or young. And I said, who are these stupid people who think that's worth fighting out about? I thought it was splitting hairs. And just like, I don't like to fight. And then I went to the Institute for Creation Research in San Diego just purely because I needed a place to stay while I visited the beach and the zoo, period. I didn't go to listen. But the very first message was Henry Morris saying, "Why does it matter?" Which was exactly what my question was. Why does this issue matter? And he brought up some really pertinent points that would be a little bit too long, I think, if I went into that. But at that point, I no longer cared about the beach or the zoo. I just wanted to listen. And so we were there for 1 week during a summer institute. And I think 5 times every day for the whole week, there was somebody speaking. And I still have those cassette tapes that pretty much, that was 1989, and I haven't lost the zeal for that message since. Creation, I believe, is really important, and it's something in everybody's heart. So I think it's our best evangelical tool. Everybody is moved when they see a beautiful mountainside or, God's beauty, the peace in his creation. It is warped at this time. It is fallen. You see blood and gore in creation now, unfortunately, but you can still see his fingerprints. And I think that he calls out to everybody through that.
That's a beautiful account. Praise the Lord. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll go into tonight's kind of semi-prepared presentation. This is never polished, but being on the internet gives me a chance to kind of, it's an extension of my thought process. So again, this was in response to Dapper Dino asking me these questions about why I'm a young Earth creationist, and I really do kind of break it up into several components. And let me see if I have let me get this. To kind of break it up, this is, kind of my personal sentiments, how I felt personally about the defensibility of intelligent design and creationism over time. This does not necessarily, this absolutely does not represent anyone else's views, because for definitely the atheists, they would mark it red, meaning there's no miracle needed for the universe or anything else. But when I was very young, pre-1970, like a lot of kids, didn't really care. And my view was there wasn't any miracles needed for any of this. And there were some subtleties about evolutionary theory I didn't even know. Come the 1970s, I began to think, you know, with that little pink coloring there, the universe by miracle and abiogenesis, I began to have just some hints. And in 1978, I became a Christian. By 1980, I was a creationist of some sort. I would identify as an Old Earth Creationist. By 1990, I'd become pretty sure that miracles were needed for the emergence of complexity and miracles needed for universal common ancestry. However, by 2002, now I wanted to go by decades, but I know I nearly had a crisis of faith in 2002, and I began to just doubt everything. So I reverted back to saying, I just don't know. And this is a theme. Let me just pause this for a little bit. This is kind of an ongoing theme. We could either say the universe or the earth or life are young, or we could say it's not, or we could say we're undecided. But this started to have theological implications. And so, you know, it's just like kind of like, okay, who's going to win the Super Bowl? Is it going to be the Bengals or the Rams? And it's, or do we just wait and see? And so to some extent, I wanted to wait and see, but yet it's like, you know, if I'm committing to the Bible in the way that I read it anyway, it would seem that I would accept it as an article of faith. It'd be reassuring if I could get evidence that would confirm that. So this led to some complications because I was like, well, it seemed that there was some sort of creation event, but the age of the earth just didn't line up in the fossil record. And I said, okay, maybe I'll just accept most of the Bible as being true. Those chapters in Genesis are a mistake handed down. I mean, I'm not saying that that is the right way to go, but that's really where I was. So going back to this diagram here, in 2002, I had doubts. By 2010, I started studying the intelligent design movement, and I was quite convinced that, like in quantum mechanics allow, one interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that there's an almighty God. And I'd seen Michael Behe. I was quite convinced also that miracles were needed for the evolution of complexity. That there's, and by the way, that, you know, miracle for the universe, that's so clear, this fine tuning, and that there would be miracles needed for universal common ancestry. And pictured on the right are some influential people. There's Richard Smalley there. If you could see my pointer here, that's Richard Smalley, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. He rejects evolution. He's an Old Earth Creationist. Charlestown is an ID proponent there. Nobel Prize winner in physics for the invention of the laser. And Michael Denton and Michael Behe both accept universal common ancestry, but Michael Behe in particular is an advocate of intelligent design. And there are people like Dr. John Sanford. I read his book somewhere around 2005, and there's Walter Brown. These are very influential people in my life. I began to entertain the idea of the solar system being created. And ironically, it was because I read an evolutionary book, Solar System Evolution, here. And then I went off to graduate school in 2008. I studied general relativity, and this picture, this gentleman here is Reginald Cahill. He's a physicist, and he began to, you know, it's funny, after I went to graduate school in after I went to graduate school in physics, studied cosmology, I said, when I heard how outrageous some of the elements of the Big Bang were, I said, this is Young Earth Creationism and Young Cosmos Creationism is not any more outrageous than anything else. I mean, the mainstream puts this forward as being a solid theory, and it's not. And I could hear that from my professors. Oh, Cindy, I'm hearing the crunching. Was there? Oh, well,
Sorry.
do you want to weigh in here?
I did. That's why I unmuted.
Okay,
so
go
I
ahead.
found it really, really interesting that it was actually evolutionary teaching that pushed you, that made you say that, wait a minute, that can't be right. And so it pushed you towards being a YEC. I think that's awesome. I'm dumbfounded oftentimes when I hear their arguments. They are just so illogical.
Yeah. So the solar system evolution, I paid in today's dollars, it'd be $200. And the opening of the book said, I want to fight creationism. And by the end of the book, I was like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. I mean, I said, if you wanted to write a Young Earth creation book, read that. I'll tell you why. Because at the end of every chapter, it was saying this is a difficult, unresolved problem. And at the time, I already completed 3 undergraduate degrees in science, including a bachelor's in mathematics with a minor in physics. And I'd taken classical mechanics. And I'm just like, yeah, the problem you pointed out, I don't think you could solve it. I think the best way the planets came to be is through a miraculous act, because this looks very unnatural. It is, to use a tired phrase, like a tornado passing through a junkyard and building a 747. Added to this, I had a professor of supplementary quantum mechanics, Dr. James Trefil. He's a Big Bang advocate and also dark matter, but he introduced me to doubt the mainstream himself because he listed problems with the Big Bang theory. And one of them, he wrote a chapter, The 5 Reasons Galaxies Can't Exist. And I was like, because I saw that cited in creationist literature, he said the 5 reasons galaxies can't exist. And he said it's one of the difficult problems in cosmology. And I'm like, oh, so you believe the Big Bang, but you're acknowledging this is a serious problem. And I'm like, amen, you know? So
could you briefly state the 5 reasons? Or would,
yeah, let me
like,
grab the book. I'm gonna run downstairs and grab it. All right, guys, I could tell this is such a good conversation. This may go a little longer, and we're going to postpone our nerd torture session on flip-ons tonight.
But Sal, if you're going to give 5 reasons, just 5 sentences, not 5 paragraphs, not 5 hours.
This is the book, Dark Side of the Universe by James Trefil. And I took his class, and that's his autograph to me. It said, to Salvador Cordova, it's been great having you in class. I got an A in the class, by the way. And it was so funny. One day, years later, he was giving a talk against intelligent design. And I said, Dr. Trefil, great lecture, but I'm a creationist and I was your student. And then he said, he told the whole audience, he said, by the way, Sal here got an A in my class. Everyone laughed. And we were just, I mean, you know, some people are very confrontational. I'm not. And especially to my beloved professor. I really loved Dr. Trefil. So he knew I was being very respectful and he applauded me. And I said, Dr. Trefil, I mean, there have been 3 PhDs. Okay, this is interesting. He was advocating against intelligent design, But then I pointed out, well, I'm a creationist and I love you, Dr. Treffel, and I took your class. And I pointed out there were 3 PhD biologists, 3 PhDs in biology awarded at George Mason to 3 creationists, to 3 young Earth creationists, Timothy Brophy, Gordon Wilson, and Timothy Standish. Now, how can you get a PhD at George Mason and they're against intelligent design and you're a creationist? That's a miracle. So 3 PhDs. There's a professor, David McQueen, of geology, professor of geology at George Mason. There's a professor of biology who got fired because she advocated intelligent design. That's Carolyn Crocker. So you've got, and then there's Dr. Charles Jackson. He got his undergraduate there before getting his PhD in education, but he was a biology student. And then you had 3 professors openly against the Big Bang, and then I'd say half in Dr. Treffel. And last but not least, there's me that came out at George Mason. So that's like a creationist factory. But let me just, this is
just because of their arguments are so lame, may I say.
so let me see if I could find, and I'll read this passage again. I've read it before about the Big Bang. And this is the beginning of kind of my journey from Old Earth creationism to Young Earth. And then I'll answer your question if that's all right. Is that all right if I just take a little detour now that we're detoured?
Little Sal, little.
Okay. I'm going to take a big detour then. In the winter of 1986, this is Dr. Treffel, I had the privilege of spending a sabbatical leave working with a paleontology group at University of Chicago. By the way, Treffel's a famous physics educator. I was working on the problem of mass extinction. What killed the dinosaurs? And the visit gave me a chance to get acquainted with David Raup, the leader of the group. Dave has been described as the most brilliant paleontologist in the world. An evaluation that after a period as his collaborator, I think is well deserved. He's also one of those rare individuals who get tremendous enjoyment from everything they do. He loves to question things that everyone else accepts without question, a trait that I suspect has a lot to do with his success as a scientist. He's also a terrific card player, as I learned to my sorrow at some late night poker sessions, and spends some of his spare time at his personal computer trying to find a way to beat the system at blackjack. I mentioned these things as background to what I want to tell you about. Something that happened during my visit with the group. We were in Dave's office discussing something or other when he turned to me and asked, right out of the blue, what are the odds that the Big Bang is correct? That brought me up short, as you can imagine. My first impulse was to say, of course it's correct, but I suspected he'd asked me how I knew, so I paused. The more I thought about the question, the more fragments of memory floated into my mind. I recalled a bag lunch in a prestigious physics department when a prominent senior member of the faculty, I wouldn't dream of embarrassing him by mentioning his name, said that he often thought of leaving a sealed envelope to be opened 50 years after his death. In the envelope would be predictions about the way certain scientific controversies would turn out. At the top of the list would be the prediction that the interpretation of the redshift as evidence for a universal expansion would turn out to be wrong, which is essentially the Big Bang being wrong.
Wow.
Yeah. This memory, together with my experience of fads and fashions in cosmology that we'll discuss later, made me reluctant to be too dogmatic in my reply. Finally, I said, I thought the general picture of the universal expansion from a hot beginning had a very high probability of being right, but that many of the details of our understanding could be easily wrong. This answer seemed to satisfy Dave, who apparently had thrown the question at me because he asked the same thing of a member of the Chicago astronomy department and had been told that the Big Bang was 100% certain. Like any skillful gambler, Dave distrusted a sure thing. But the more I thought about the question, the more I realized that it is not possible to give a single definitive answer to it. The Big Bang Theory has many facets, and each has a different level of confidence attached to it. As an exercise in making judgments, in the opposite chart, I gave my own guess at the odds that various aspects of the Big Bang picture presented in this chapter are correct. And so he gives a list here. At the very bottom, it says any of the theories of galaxy formation and large-scale structure discussed later on. The probability that it's correct is only, he scored only 10%. And then the next chapter is this chapter, the 5 reasons galaxies can't exist. Let's see if I'm sorry. See, the 5 reasons why galaxies can't exist. Chapter 4. Hang on, I got a bot here. We just got attacked, and I'm gonna take care of the bot. So I'll just give an overview. Trefel says, we can summarize the modern view of the universe in 2 brief statements. First, the universe has been expanding ever since it was formed, and in the process has evolved from simple to complex structures. Second, the visible matter in the universe is organized hierarchically. The stars grouped into galaxies, galaxies into clusters, and clusters into superclusters. The problem we face, then, is to understand how a universe whose evolution is dominated by the first statement, that is expansion, could be the one whose structure is described by the second, that is galaxies and organization of galaxies and stars. The problem of explaining the existence of galaxies has proved to be one of the thorniest in cosmology. By all rights, they just shouldn't be there. Yet there they sit. It's hard to convey the depth of frustration that this simple fact induces among scientists. Time after time, new developments have come along, and it has seemed that the problem was solved. Each time the solution turned soft, new problems developed, and we were right back where we started.
So basically, because the universe has been expanding, and the nature of a galaxy is to not expand, they're mutually exclusive, kind of?
Somewhat like that, because you're trying to concentrate matter, and yet matter is matter is being spread out, and you're trying to concentrate it, and they know that at the rate of the expansion, the gravitation is not sufficient to pull it together, something like that. But this is really funny. The opening quote, he's quoting here. It's a quote from Nick Kosarok. He's a Montana snowplow driver during the blizzard of 1985. And this is what he said: the progress report is that there is no progress. So trying to solve this problem. So what are the 5 reasons?
Sal, there's just a beautiful analogy that just came out of your lips. A snowblower. Okay, if the universe is expanding and started with a big bang, then that's like snow blowing out. No amount of gravity is ever going to make that snow come into a snowball.
The rate of expansion is too fast. I think that summarizes it quite well. It's just like, exactly, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So I'll just give you the reasons, the 5 reasons in 1 sentence each. Galaxies could not have formed before atoms. That's part 1. And I'm not going to read the whole thing as to why he said that. Galaxies haven't had the time to form, number 2. Number 3, turbulence won't work either. Number 4, galaxies haven't had time to form clusters. Number 5, if radiation clumps with matter and matter clumps into galaxies, the cosmic microwave radiation comes out wrong. And they tried to solve this with dark matter and dark matter's in doubt. And kind of the way, the line of reasoning here is exactly kind of, yeah, when I was studying solar system evolution, we had all these complications, and I'm like, well, a miracle could fix that. Maybe the universe and life are structured to tell you it can't happen naturally. So let's go back to my little chart here. When people of the caliber of Richard Smalley rejected abiogenesis and evolution, I said this got it got my attention. And then when Charles Townes, I mean, these two guys are Nobel Prize winners. So that's why I said this whole thing about abiogenesis and the universe by a miracle. We've got some really top class scientists supporting that. So that was something I could always hold on to. So now let me just go now to my next slide. So as I said, in 2002, that's when I had my crisis of faith. I began to doubt everything. And let me see here. Let me expand this. Another way of looking at the way I group things together, the things in green here are basically the core of intelligent design. Right here. They may not use the word miracle, but I'll use that. They'll just say intelligent design, but if you'll allow a little bit of linguistic liberty, I'll say miracle. But basically, this is very important to me.
Can you move it over to the right so we can see the black writing on the left, right underneath the word live? That shows what each of those levels represents, and I can't read that.
Oh, okay. Let me see what's going on.
Or just read them.
Okay, it shows on my screen. Okay, so abiogenesis, the first line is abiogenesis and universe by miracle. And the next line is miracles needed for evolution of complexity. And then the next line is miracles needed for universal common ancestry.
Wow.
Then there's the problem of shared errors, common descent. So creationism needs to solve that. The next is human life is young. The next is the fossil record young and Noah's flood true. The next is the Earth and solar system being created. And the last is the cosmos is young. And that's the distant starlight problem. Now, I'm going to probably redo the categories and all. But it's hard to convey just how green. I couldn't make this any greener, the part about intelligent design, because it gets stronger every day. And when James Tour weighed in against Dave Farina, I was like, it was just blowing away the other side. You know, whereas when I was going to school in 1970, I was watching Jacob Bernowski, and it was like a science series, and they're talking about the Urey Miller experiment and how that proved life could emerge naturally. That's been totally discredited. So now in 2020, it's a different story. They're now appealing. This is where I was saying they have to appeal to multiple universes to explain the origin of life. So roughly, we could say young Earth creationism, young cosmos creationism will include intelligent design. So if you're a creationist, you automatically believe in some form of intelligent design. But if you're an advocate of intelligent design, you're not necessarily a young Earth creationist. So that's the distinction. And so in 2020, I was not, you know, the distant starlight problem in the youth of the solar system was not very, I don't think I could defend it very well even to this day. But here, the fossil record and human life being young, I'd say that's better. There's the problem of what they call shared errors, where we have the appearance of errors or possible real errors that are both in our genomes and then the genomes of other creatures, especially chimpanzees. And that's very troubling, and it's troubling even to the top tier creationists like Dr. John Sanford. Now,
Wouldn't
oh,
that
go
go in
ahead, Cindy.
the category of being fallen?
Yes, it could be. It could be, or they're not errors after all, and that's actually the subject of the talk tonight.
Kind of like how
For 45 years, I'm sorry.
I think we're going to say the same thing about the appendix.
Yeah, so there are just lots of things. But for 45 years or so, they, you know, as we began to learn about the DNA in humans and chimpanzees, they said these repetitive elements, especially what they call the elute elements, they said those are shared errors, and there are millions of them shared between chimps and humans. And they said, well, that's evidence of common ancestry. Turns out they're functional, so they're not errors after all. They could be created. So it's getting better. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the timeline here a little bit because things are moving fast. So let me change the time. I'm just going to change the numbers a little bit so you could see it. But before that, here's some quotes by Darwin. They're taken out of context here, but they do echo some sentiments. So just accept that qualifier. So Darwin said, one cannot look at this universe without all living productions in man, without believing that all has been intelligently designed. And then after that, he would say, well, yeah, okay, I said it was out of context. He would then say, well, I don't see that in biology. So he said, I'm kind of agnostic on this. But he was echoing that
biology is living things.
Well, he didn't think biology was intelligently designed. That was the point of his Origin of Species, his book. But he said on a grand scale, he thought it looked intelligently designed. So he said, I'm kind of undecided. You know, I got this data point that says yes, another one that says no. So I'm undecided. That's kind of my interpretation anyway. But he did say, these are his words. Okay.
What you just read was that all living things. That is the definition of biology right there.
Right. And I think what he's meaning on the grand scale, like when you zoom out. But when he looked at individual species, he was saying, nah. And so, well, sometimes you complain about people talking out of both sides of their mouth. I think to be charitable, I think it's sometimes someone is conflicted. They have kind of two opposing views that they hold, and they haven't quite reconciled them. I think that's kind of where Darwin was.
Actually, I know quite a bit about cognitive dissonance. So yes, I would have to give him that grace. You're right.
Yeah. And he said, intelligent design has perplexed me beyond measure. Now, this is a quote from the Origin of Species, and people could say, well, maybe he was just trying to appease his Christian wife or whatever. But whatever the case, this is what he actually said, and this is from his book, Origin of Species. And you could see the highlighted part there. The progenitor of innumerable extinct and living descendants was created. The progenitor of innumerable extinct and living descendants was created. That means he believed there was a first life that could have been created, and then that one evolved. In his other writings, he suggested like a naturalistic origin of life emerging from a warm little pond. But in this book, he's postulating it was created by a creator. So just take the words for what they were, and people can interpret it all sorts of ways. Why he said that, but I'm just pointing out that this whole thing with creationism, it's more subtle because you could either be full young cosmos creationist, or you could just, you can take parts of it out and say, yeah, this is definitely a work of God or a creator, but then I don't think the rest is. So this is why I put this diagram forward. and you could almost put Darwin in that category of thinking, well, maybe the whole universe is made by a creator. And he went on to say, well, the problem of evil, so therefore I think I'm agnostic, I'm not atheist. Okay, so I changed the timeline a little bit. You'll see now I made it a little bit more subtle. I made distinction between 2016 and 2022. 2016 was 2 years after I started working as a professional creationist researcher. And the problem of shared errors looked, it was very troubling to me. As of 2022, I think that's a green. I think we've solved it. I don't think the evolutionists, and we're not going to look back either. I also think now the evidence is stronger here for human life being young. That's why I put it a little bit greener. And that's the genetic entropy hypothesis. And then the fossil record being young. So you could see that the trend has been from like the mainstream view in my life. I'm accepting it. It's becoming very close to young Earth creationism. The two
You're
areas I have
evolving.
problem, huh?
You're evolving.
Yes. So the two areas that are problematic are the age of the solar system, but I put that now in yellow. And I do think it's created, and then now the age of the entire cosmos. This is still very problematic, but I do believe it's sometime 2XXX, which means unspecified, but by that time, hopefully the Lord has returned. I think at the rate we're going, I could imagine at some point it becomes all green. So that's kind of a rough overview. And I just wanted to say, if evolutionary biologists or abiogenesists and evolutionists will say, oh, well, that's something we'll have to solve later. If they are using that as a putting that forward to help bolster their faith in evolutionism or abiogenesisism, that's not really a word. Why can't creationists invoke that too? And my justification for that is I could see the trend of the data. Now, one could take the option that I'll just wait and see, and I do respect that too. But at a personal level, I have kind of a theological stake in this, so I freely admit that. So, if you have any comments, and then we'll move on to the specific topic of tonight, which is carbon-14 dating. And I see that I'm going to run over. I'm going to have to. Why don't you echo some thoughts? I'm going to have to adjust the next talk, the start time, because we're running over, and that's fine, because I think this is a good conversation, and I don't think people are particularly eager to get to the nerd torture session. So, Cindy, if you have some thoughts.
I did, but I lost them.
You're having a Joe
What was
Biden
the last
moment.
sentence that you said about? Oh, I'm sorry. This. Well, I guess just I found it interesting that I guess you respect mainstream science more than I do. I would accept things by faith, knowing that this mainstream science is just speculating on quite a bit of stuff. To actually think that we could know about distant starlight and millions or trillions or billions of years, to me just seems so arrogant. Yeah.
Okay, I pushed back the time for the nerd torture session. By the way, if any of you want to hear about flip-ons and ALU elements and biophysics, that's the nerd torture session. We're gonna talk about adenine to inosine RNA editing. Okay, I guess you all are getting a feel for what that'll be. So we'll just extend this talk a little more since I sense people are interested in it. And I'd like to thank all the viewers. So, so let's move forward to the topic, specifically carbon-14. So now let me expand this. Story of radiometric dating. And this is a little bit sorted with creationism. It's a little bit embarrassing. There's a changing story of radiometric dating. So before 2004, many creationists were saying carbon-14 dating is unreliable. In 2004, they were still saying that. By 2022, creationists claimed carbon-14 dating establishes the fossil record is young. So they've definitely done a 180 on this particular isotope.
Never mind, go ahead.
Oh, please ask.
How would they say that C14 establishes a young fossil record when we don't use C14 to date a fossil?
Okay, so this is the topic of tonight then. So the rest will actually, so that's a great question, and that actually pertains today. So when I went down to the, just so people know, I went down to the Institute of Creation Research, and I'd been sympathetic to this. I talked to one of their top researchers, their top researcher in the field of collagens in dinosaur bones and in other fossils, Dr. Brian Thomas. And Dr. Thomas, he and I agreed C14 shows the fossil record is young. Dr. Thomas, PhD from a secular school, his dissertation covered this. He had experiments that are significant, and I'll share those. He also has the peer review and expert review. And he finally, I said, Dr. Thomas, this is really quiet. No one's talking about this. Are you concerned that they're gonna retract your papers or even your dissertation? He said, well, it's been long enough now. Just go ahead, Sal, talk about it. And he felt that it's time. So we've been kind of quiet about this for 4 years. So there are many times I've been in the Young Earth debate. I wanted to put this stuff on the table, but I was really worried about a retraction because retractions have happened. Because the evolutionary side could get really upset when something on the creationist side makes it the secular peer review. And I'm in that situation now. I published, and creationists have published, I published with other creationist co-authors in secular peer review. And I keep wondering, okay, when might the axe fall and they're going to force a retraction on the editor and embarrass him or whatever. So we'll cover your question there. So let's go right into it. I found, so I Googled for a thumbnail for carbon-14, and they had this carbon-14 dating game, just random. Okay, so that's a thumbnail. Just wanted to explain what that was all about. This is some sort of game based on dating, guys and girls. They call it C14. Okay, I don't know. I have no clue other than that what that is. So guys, this is not an endorsement that you should play that game whatsoever. I just thought it was cute. C14 dating. So basically there is this isotope. Carbon is normally carbon-12. That would be 6 protons and 6 neutrons in the nucleus. Carbon-14 would have an abundance of neutrons, and it makes it unstable, and it can undergo radioactive decay, specifically what they call beta decay, and it becomes nitrogen-14. So if an organism starts out with this, and you take a guess at how much carbon-14 it had, when it has less, you can infer a date. And so that's done with the half-lives. So after, it's really about 5,730 years. So if it has half as much of the estimated, half the percentage of the modern carbon-14. Oh, we lost Cindy. Cindy, where are you? I'll wait for her to come back. She got disconnected. Oh, you're back. Are you there? Cindy? Oh, dropped out again. I'm going to wait a little bit. Hopefully she'll be able to recover her connection.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened, why I disappeared. But
Well, you're back.
I'm back. I wanted to say, you said take a guess?
Yes, I'll tell you where the guess is based on. What we do is we take present organisms and we can measure how much carbon-14 is in something that's alive today. And that's a reasonable guess, because we'll say the carbon-14 comes from the atmosphere, cosmic rays from the sun hit the atmosphere, and it creates carbon-14, and then you and I will eat plants that had converted that carbon-14 and made it part of their, part of the plant, and then we eat the plants, and then we have carbon-14 in us. And so we can measure the amount of carbon-14 in plants today and the amount of carbon-14 in plants and animals. And that's how we get that guess. It's an educated guess.
Yes, but it assumes that life millions of years ago was the same as today.
Correct. So, but without getting into the details, we can say that that guess is a reasonable first start. Now, interestingly, if God made the world and the air didn't have carbon-14 in it, it would take a while before the concentration of carbon-14 reached the maximum.
I've never heard that thought before, Sal.
Yeah, so it says, and in fact, Canadian Cool Dude actually is very insightful. Any idea how long it should take for the Earth to reach carbon-14 equilibrium? I'm going to throw out a figure. I'd say about 1,000 years, which is about 1,000 years between the creation of the world and Noah's flood. So equilibrium was probably reached sometime shortly after Noah's flood. There might have been atmospheric conditions that were protecting the Earth especially, but there was a slow accumulation of carbon-14. So that's going to affect the carbon-14 dates. So hold that thought, okay? Hold that thought, if you all can. And someone says, but I mean a close equilibrium. So we'll just move on. I don't want to get too bogged down with this. But there's still something important here. Assume that it's even twice or three times. We're going to go back to the graph. It only takes 5,730 years to get it cut in half. So let's say it's 10 times as much. Well, you just need like a few tens of thousands more years, and it's going to, it'll decay that out. The point is that if there is carbon-14 in a fossil, it shouldn't be there. If it's millions or hundreds of millions of years old, it's just not going to happen.
Now you realize that they are debunking that now by saying something like it leached in from somewhere else, or I forget what they're saying, but I recently read.
Oh yeah. Okay. So that's why my meeting with Dr. Thomas was important, and there've been other things, other developments. and we can go into this with a lot more detail. And I will quote Dapper Dino in this, and he will him articulating what he believes is exactly what you're saying, and I'm going to try to counter those points. So let's move forward.
Yeah, in fact, it was on Erica's thing.
Yeah, okay.
Because one of the things that was very powerful for me in the Science Center was that the government had carbon dated fossil fuels, oil and gas, and found carbon-14 in them. And Erica saying something, she was able to excuse that somehow.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to deal with that. So this is directed at Erica's comments. I think Mr. Wilford is talking about that dating game. He said it's totally wholesome here. The C14 dating game, this one here. Mr. Wilford, were you talking about this one here? Okay, so let's just move forward. Okay, there's ways to measure the amount of C14. The old way was with this Geiger counter. So some of you are familiar with the Geiger counter. You just put it up, and it counts how many counts per second. The problem is that when we get to very low levels, toward the, let's see, this is 20. At about here, the Geiger counter cannot distinguish between what's coming from the carbon and what's coming from the background. There are all sorts of radioactive things in our background, like in the room you're in or the outdoors. And the Geiger counter, very sensitive Geiger counters, will start to pick that up. And around this point here, after about 4.5 half-life cycles, really closer to 5, it's not going to be able to distinguish the background from what's in the carbon-14 in the fossil. And Dapper Dino will allude to that. But there are other technologies that will change that. And that is the accelerator mass spectrometer. The accelerator mass spectrometer. So now, let me just show how sensitive this thing is. And this is going to be important. Any questions before I play it?
No?
Okay, so let me try to get this thing going here. All right, I'll shut this down. And I'll put the video, and I cleared the copyright on it, so I'm thrilled about that, because this is too good not to share.
The AMS itself, an accelerator mass spectrometer, has really 3 components. One is called the low energy end. Let's take the example of carbon. And radiocarbon is present in the environment at 1 million millionths of an atom. So it's a very, very trace isotope. So what we do is we take any sample, we convert it to graphite. There's a little aluminum button with the graphite in the center of it, and we can mount up to 200 of these graphite targets into a cartridge type, we call an ion source. Because what we're going to do is take the atoms of carbon in that graphite and convert them to ions. We're going to ionize them. Once you get things ionized, you can move them because we use electrical fields and voltage fields, voltage gradients, magnetic fields to move these ions around. So we're going to create an ion beam. So it's a beam of carbon racing out of our source. We bend that beam around with magnets and electrostatic devices and aim it into a big tank. So we're looking at a tank right here. It's a T-shaped tank filled with an insulant, sulfur hexafluoride, because we're going to create a huge voltage in that tank. And so it's like a big transformer that you see in hydro systems, except ours is 3 million volts. So we're going to race those ions towards that positive pole, and then we're going to switch them. We're going to strip those electrons off carbon and turn it to a positive ion just as it hits that positive pole. And it's going to shoot them out the other end. Now we're going up to a few percent of the speed of light. So our ion beam is really rocketing. As we're walking over here now to the west side of the machine, we're at the high energy end. So our ion beam is racing out as the flight path goes into a magnet. And we've got a few control sensors along it. These are electronic lenses, so we can change the shape of that beam. So now we're looking at a magnet. It's actually the big, what we call the analyzer magnet. It's 18 tons, a whack of energy, because we have to bend that beam at 90 degrees. And so we've got just pure carbon coming down there, but carbon has these isotopes, carbon-12, and then carbon-13 with an extra neutron, and carbon-14 with an extra 2 neutrons. And that's the guy we're looking for. So as we bend that beam, the lighter isotope, carbon-12, bends the most, carbon-13 likewise, but carbon-14 continues on, straight on down that pipe. So we're going to now count, we're going to measure the strength of the carbon-12 and the carbon-13 beams, but carbon-14 is a very weak beam, and we can't measure its strength with current. We have to actually count the atoms of carbon in that beam. So at the very end, we have a detector filled with a gas, isobutane, and the carbon-14 atoms come down and collide with those, with the isobutane, and they give off their energy. So this is a high-speed collision. All that energy is dissipated, and each time there's a collision, we measure that energy. So now we come up with a count, and the number of carbon atoms is compared to the carbon-12 that we measured, and that tells us the concentration.
Now, wasn't that totally cool?
Clear as mud.
Oh dear.
The one thing I
Okay.
get is that the speed is different. And so that's how they isolate the 14 from the others. But it is based on the assumption that all living things have the same ratio.
Okay, clear as mud. Okay, so if we have a small car and we have a truck, whoa, if we have a small car versus a truck, it's going to be harder to turn the truck when it's moving. You'll need more force.
Right.
I mean, and so the magnetic field is providing that force, and it's just not able to turn the C14 as easily. So it tends to have a straighter path. So like if you have something that's denser and it's in the wind can take the thing that's less dense and shove it around, but
Yeah. That
can't.
makes sense. That's actually
All
how
right.
a rainbow works.
So now the important thing is the carbon-12, we can get like on the order of 10 to the 12th. That's a huge number of atoms. But the carbon-14, we can even count like 1, 2, 3 individually. That's a very sensitive detector. Now I'll point out, it's like, okay, so maybe the C12 might have a little error bar. You know, it could be, say, let's say plus or minus 5%. Then you would have to adjust the count of the carbon-14 by plus or minus 5%. So if you had like say 100 carbon-14 and there was some uncertainty in your carbon-12, well, you could say maybe it's 95 atoms of carbon-14 or 105, but it's probably around 100. So this is extremely, extremely precise. And the point is, the reason I brought that up, oh dear, is that it would be able to go out way out here, not just at 57,000 years, but you could get extremely, they actually predicted they might even be able to get out to 200,000 years because this thing is so sensitive, so sensitive. So the reason I'm putting this out there is they keep saying it's unreliable past this point here. Let me show it to you here, sorry. That it's unreliable past this point here. I'm just like, no, it can count, you could see it could count individual atoms. This is not, they keep making up a story that it's unreliable. They don't actually give a reason why. It's not in the instrumentation. They have to come up and say it's background or whatever. It's like, well, where's the background coming from? We're not dealing like with the Geiger counter that's looking at background radiation. We're actually just counting the C14. So where's the source? Brian Thomas has found it kind of in here where there's 5% carbon-14, 5% modern. That's definitely detectable. It's definitely detectable. I'm sorry?
You did bring up the point about the carbon-12 is not as accurate, and that's one of the components of the ratio.
Right, but it, and I'm just interject, this is my view, and it's, you know, it can be reviewed. If you're off by 5 to 10% in the carbon-12, then you'll be off by 5 to 10% here. And what that means is, like, let's say you have 10% modern 10% C14 in modern carbon. So your number, that might be the reported number, but if your uncertainty is, you know, plus or minus 5%, it could, you know, you might have only 9.5% or 10.5, but it's still, you still have a trace amount. So you'll still be in the ballpark.
Okay.
You don't have to be that precise in counting your carbon-12. The important thing is you count your carbon-14 accurately. And this thing can count, they were showing it could count individual atoms.
Got it.
It was counting 3, okay? So what if it's the difference between counting 9 or counting 11? You're still in the ballpark. You've got a trace amount. And this will be contested. All right, so John B is pointing out some of the introduces. Okay, so there are limits to this, and those are some of the considerations. To this date, we don't know where some of this is coming from, but with the Geiger counter, we're definitely in this territory. We can use the Geiger counters for here. Out here, definitely we could measure, because it's only a little bit farther here, because we're not dealing with background radiation at this point. So this is subject to more discussion. And, you know, so notwithstanding everything that John B has put forward, and it's good to be, it's good to be skeptical here. And, you know, like a lot of things, we have to be careful. But there are other signs of youth, including the chemical clock. So you have the C14 clock and the chemical clock. And I'm going to start to address the contamination. But first, I'm going to play what Dapper Dino said in his show with Steve McRae. And this is where I'm just going to have to comment. And I said, I have to disagree here with Dapper Dino and Steve McRae about what they said. In light of what you just saw with the precision of accelerator mass spectrometry, they're talking about beta decays, which is using the Geiger counter. And so I think that's a mistake. So let me play the clip of Steve and Dapper talking to a Young Earth Creationist. And the Young Earth Creationist put forward the idea of carbon-14 And that's why I felt it was important to kind of challenge that. So let me just cue this up here. So this is on the Steve McRae show. Oh, this is fabulous here. We've got a isotope geochemist. So fabulous. All right. So let me see if I can get this to share. Okay, McRae. See, we attracted all sorts of great people, qualified experts today. So that's fabulous. Okay, let me expand this and we'll play it.
So, like mentioned, carbon-14. I don't want again too technical. You both Dapper and I were ex-Navy nukes, so we do have a little bit of experience with radiological things and dealing with half-lives and things of that nature. But every time I look at a creationist argument when it deals with carbon-14, as somebody who has at least a basic understanding of the physics, I recognize that every one of those claims is not based upon a proper sound understanding of physics. And I think Dapper would agree upon that.
I would agree.
Well, I know
with one exception, which is
concept of C14. Oh, good.
I would say that the physics underlying the C14 in Diamond's paper wasn't necessarily wrong. Instead, what was wrong was that they didn't actually bother to check for carbon-14. They checked for beta minus decay, which has more than one source. And also, they ignored the possibility of newly formed carbon-14.
Yeah, it depends on whether it's androgenous carbon-14 or not. And the carbon-14 that they found in like things like diamonds and things of that nature is not endogenous, and it's not actually.
They also didn't actually demonstrate it was carbon-14.
Yeah, and the thing also is that you only find those kind of beta decay daughters in coal and alluvian diamonds that have been really close in proximity to thorium or uranium deposits. So if you look at a diamond that has not been near a thorium or uranium deposit, it doesn't have those beta decays, and it wouldn't indicate any type of carbon-14 or any other type of beta emitter. So we only find that in very specific types of sources, which explains why. It has nothing to do with the age of the Earth. It just has to do with the source has been contaminated.
Okay, so I had to correct something there. They used the word beta decay. That's not how kind of the high-end detection of carbon-14 is done. It's with the accelerator mass spectrometry. You can get very precise, much more precise than the Geiger counter. So that's the first correction. So now the problem with leaching or contamination is the next thing. Do you have any questions here, Cindy? Well, I'm going to have to pull up another PowerPoint that would be helpful.
Yes, I thought beta meant carbon-14, and that is what we were looking for. The method being spectrometry or Geiger.
That's right. So what the Geiger counter is doing is it's trying to measure how many emissions, how many beta particles, actually the amount of radiation kind of coming out of the sample. It'll tell you how much carbon-14 is there, but it's not very, there's a point that it can't actually, it starts to become really unreliable whether you're detecting carbon-14 or something else. So Steve and Dapper said, we're not even sure that it's detecting the carbon-14.
What else would you maybe be detecting?
One, other isotopes of other radiation sources, and then also what they call background radiation, because there's always this radiation we're exposed to constantly. It's in the environment, it's in the air.
Okay, so you're still talking about C14, you're just talking about it coming from a different source.
It could be C14, and there are other sources of beta decay. And we happen to have
Okay, that's what I was wondering. That's what I
Yeah.
didn't know.
yeah, we have isotope geochemist. He might be able to weigh in and talk about the other sources of beta decay. But one way to circumvent that is we use the accelerator mass spectrometry, which doesn't count how many beta decays per second. It actually counts how many atoms it's able to detect in the sample, which is really cool. Okay, so here
Which would be limited to C14 only, no other.
correct.
Okay.
If you set up your experiment correctly. So John, and I want to thank John B for visiting, said counting methods work fine so long as the material is young enough to have lots of decays per minute, or as long as you can measure it long enough, okay? However, I would, correct me if I'm wrong, John B, even though it's expensive, I would rate the accelerator mass spectrometry to be the more choice method if you can afford it. And thank you very much for your responses. Said, other isotopes with beta decay could include potassium. However, as long as the material really isn't old, we can distinguish between C14 and potassium decay. So there you go. There it is. So there's potassium in our body, for example. So this is really good. So I want to thank John B for weighing in. So
Now that blows my mind because I thought that we were just going C14 only. And if it's possibly that potassium could be counted by mistake, I mean, I'm coming from the position that it's unreliable as opposed to your second premise that it could be, well, it was a valid point that we can't say, oh, well, let's date dinosaur bones with it if we're going to say at the same time it's not reliable. I just think there's a whole lot of factors involved that make it easy to manipulate on,
right.
yeah.
So this is okay. What I need to highlight here then is there has been both a transition and still maybe some conflict within the young Earth community that the level of reliability of radiometric dating. So we're kind of in a funny position. You have the camp that is saying this is, at least as far as carbon-14, we want to argue it's a little bit more reliable than we had said in the past. But then this would also conflict with other creationist models that argue for accelerated nuclear decay. And the other side, some are very sharp.
What you
We'll
said,
pick up on this. We're not in uniform agreement. So go on.
or not necessarily just accelerated decay, which supposedly would make a lot of heat, but just that it was starting from a different point. You made the point that maybe there was no radioactive elements in the beginning.
Correct.
I mean, these are just things we just can't necessarily know and shouldn't be assuming.
Right. So why did I put the accelerator mass spectrometry here? The issue with the potassium decay here comes up when you're using the Geiger counter. But
So that'll
what we try to do with the accelerator,
use the other.
that's why I'm saying that if we use the accelerator mass spectrometry, the method eliminates a lot of those problems. You'll get a
Right.
more accurate measurement. And that's where I'm going with this, because what Brian Thomas did is he sent his samples off to accelerator mass spectrometry lab, and that's a very expensive process. So that's what I'm trying to point out. They went the extra mile. They went to the best available. Okay.
I still want to date dinosaur bones with that.
Okay. So you want to, if you're going to try to measure C14, you use this machine here. You use this machine. Okay, so let's move forward. So what did Brian Thomas do? So rightly, Dapper Dino, Erica, and Steve McCrae point out some forms of contamination. So let's just move forward a little bit. I happen to be writing a paper on collagen. Collagen is about 30%, 20 to 30% of human protein weight is collagen. And it's a beauty product, and it's a real protein that's in human beings. This is the spelling of the amino acids in collagen, where each letter represents an amino acid. In the case of the collagen type 1 alpha 1 paralog, it's 1464 amino acids. It has a signature pattern here. You can recognize collagen that way. Lots of creatures have collagens. Humans have collagens. Zebrafish. So we're 75% similar in our collagen to a zebrafish. I don't know how similar we are to dinosaurs. Amazingly, even though we're having a hard time sequencing dinosaur DNA, we can get fragments of dinosaur collagen and sequence them. A little difficult, but it's doable. And so what's my point with this? So collagens are made of amino acids. Amino acids have carbon, and that makes them amenable to carbon-14 dating. The other thing is, let me back out here. Bacteria do not make collagens. Fungi don't make collagens. If you have collagen, okay, there's a collagen extraction process, and we know this from like the dessert industry. Jell-O, which you buy in the grocery store, you take cow bones, you subject it to weak acid and some other processes, you can extract the collagen from it. What Brian Thomas did, he had samples. I'm going to bring up this slide here, see if I have it, if you'll permit me here. I want to see if I can grab it. Hang on.
I don't know
I have pictures. Oh, go on.
I don't know if this matters, but recently I did a lot of research on collagen and gelatin, and they take the hides, not just the bones. The skin is how they get collagen, or yeah. Some of it's bone meal, bone broth, and some of it is from the skin, the hides.
Okay, but you can also extract it from the bone, and I'm not, I'm unfortunately not that knowledgeable on how that is done, but just suffice to say it can be done. So let me just show some slides here. Hang on, let me, I found some of the slides I wanted to show. We have Dr. Brian Thomas's dissertation at the University of Liverpool. So let me show that. And just, if you'll just indulge me a little bit. This is his PhD dissertation here. Collagen remnants in ancient bones. So it goes through this gelatinization process. It goes through this gelatinization process. And in that process, then you don't have bacteria. You don't have anything that's made by bacteria. It's just collagen. The most reasonable explanation is that it came from, we lost Cindy for a second here. The most reasonable explanation is that is the dinosaur collagen. Yeah. And if we wanted to apply mass spec to some of the samples, we can establish, because there's a signature in the sequence, just like I showed with the amino acids, you can distinguish. There's been a paper that shows you can actually identify the species based on the collagen sequence. So,
What?
okay, and Mr. Wilford's here, and he spoke to a world expert. Okay, so this is very difficult. And I believe Brian Thomas would totally agree with this. Okay, so Dr. Thomas had a very hard time getting enough. So I'm not. There have been some great comments here in the comment section. So this is what I call teaching young Earth creationism responsibly. You have to hear the other sides and their concerns. All right? So we'll try to treat this fairly. That being said, I often say that the standard applies to the other side as well. They have to show that they're careful, particularly the evolutionary biologists and the abiogenesists, and they're not held to the same standard, not at all. They don't hold themselves to the same standard as skepticism. I'm just pointing that out just to be fair. So if you're going to be very critical on the young Earth creationists, then that's welcome and that's important. I welcome this, and I'm glad Mr. Wilford and John B. have joined. So now we will, I'll show then, Brian Thomas got this in expert review. His co-author, let me see if I can, this was written by, it does, yeah, this is the title. Unfortunately, it doesn't show. It was written by, oh yeah, here it is, Brian Thomas and Stephen Taylor. Stephen Taylor is a very respected spectroscopist in chemistry. So very respected spectroscopist. The reason he was invited, the editor of Expert Review just asked him, said, just write on anything you want. So that's very rare that you get in peer review where the editor has already cleared you because he respects you so much. He said, just say whatever you want. Write a paper that you feel on a topic is important to you. That's how respected Stephen Taylor was. And Brian Thomas worked for him. Okay, so now let's look at the data here. And I can't tell you, notwithstanding the concern that Mr. Wilford put forward, and I appreciate his input, whether it got to that level. But I'm going to point out, let me see, in this sample, let's see if I can find it here. This is where we got 5.59% modern carbon in the collagen percent modern carbon. After the gelatinization process, we got some with 2.36% and 2.16%. Now, if people are skeptical, the thing that can be done is if we can find other fossils and repeat the experiment. That's going to be challenging. The other thing I had a discussion with Dr. Thomas is that, can we look at a way we could do this with other kinds of fossils and not collagen, where the process might be simpler? And we left it at that when I was at his office 2 weeks ago. But the thing is that the chemical dates align there. So when we run that number like 5.59% or 2.16%, why do we get ages of 24,000 years to 50,000 years? That goes back to the supposed concentration of carbon-14. So in a young Earth model where we started off with no C14 in the atmosphere, that would explain the discrepancy. But even granting that, even if we just strip this of kind of, the insistence of theology that it has to be like less than 10,000, indication that this level of traces is very It should be unsettling to definitely assert that the dinosaur bones are indeed tens of millions or hundreds of millions of years old. I've done some chemical studies, digging up papers. I never actually did the experiment, that indicate the racemization state of certain fossils in the Cambrian is not consistent with hundreds of millions of years. It looks relatively recent. It shouldn't be more than a couple million. And then there are other chemical dates like oxidation and just so many other things. So whatever Mary Schweitzer was saying about leaching or contamination, I feel this has done a very good job of at least attempting to clarify that. And, you know, like I said, bacteria don't make collagens. And so the collagen, if we find it, has to be the dinosaurs. We can also subject it to sequencing analysis, and you know, so people ask, why am I Young Earth Creationist? Am I saying this is absolute proof? I'm saying no, but it's enough that if I were on the other side, this would be very unsettling. And John says here, I'm happy to share why this is not unsettling, but I don't want to barge in and welcome. It's your show. Oh no, let me give you my email, John B. If you want to come on the show. I'm for what we call teaching Young Earth creation responsibly. So I think Young Earth Creationist. Okay, so if I could explain who I am, I'm a molecular biophysics researcher, and I've worked for Dr. John C. Sanford. Many of my colleagues are professors in secular universities or Christian colleges. They teach creation. They believe in creation, but they teach secular science like biochemistry. Like one of my colleagues is Dr. Joe DeWeese. He's published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. Dr. Sanford was Cornell University professor. And so I am concerned about Christians going through college. They should be aware of the challenges that they will encounter to their beliefs, not just about Christianity, but also creationism. And I think they need to be equipped that maybe what they're told in the Sunday schools and pulpits, it's not quite as easy. Once you get into a secular environment, you'll be challenged with other views. And I do want to expose prospective science students, like a prospective Joe DeWeese, going through school, to the other side. So, oh boy, the bot showed up in an inopportune time. I'm going to drop my email in the side chat. So if you'll, John B., if you want to get in contact with me, I would be very happy to entertain you coming here. And it's very gracious of you to visit. So, you know, I recognize you may have an opposing view, but I think it's the responsible thing to let someone of your caliber have the chance to air his expertise and objections. So let me make sure I'm hiding. Okay, someone took care of him. So I'm just typing a letter to John B. This has already been productive. Okay. Does Mr. Wilford, do you know who John B. is? Don't disclose anything personal, but if you do, I can also get to him by talking to you. So I want to express my sincere thanks to you all joining and tonight, and you know, that's pretty much it. So just maybe to go back a little bit, because of, what I've been seeing with the origin of life, and then also as we've increased understanding of molecular biology, to me, it takes miracles to make the first life. It takes miracles for the eukaryotic, the transition, the emergence of eukaryotic cells from the prokaryotic cells. I've done lectures, I've done presentations on that. And I think the evolution of proteins is really problematic for evolution, and I did a presentation on that on this channel. And I do work in with protein researchers. And then I think genetic deterioration is very serious. It's serious. I don't know of any major geneticist that thinks the human condition's improving. One of them said that, asked rhetorically, why aren't we dead 100 times over? And if we, I recently published a chapter co-authored with some very distinguished scientists in a reference work in mathematics, published by Springer Nature. And if we use that notion of genetic decay that we put forward in that paper, I think the case is very strong that we should be dead by now. Collectively, the human genome is aging. And for that reason, I'm more sympathetic to this view. So it's not like this is coming out in isolation. It's something that I see in my own field. So I wanted to convey that to Dapper Dino, that at this point, and especially me having come from a theistic evolution background, really on evidential matters, it's really hard for me to say that the mainstream viewpoint is solid. I think it should invite a lot of questioning, and I could see how doubts have been raised, and enough so that some people became Young Earth Creationists just on the way to the evidence. So those are my views. And we have to wrap it up because I have another show that I'm already late for. So Cindy, why don't you have if you have some things to say, please say it while I try to set up the other show.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that genetic entropy goes along with the other entropy. And Dapper Dino was trying to say that the second law of thermodynamics does not apply as an anti-evolution evidence because it's an open system. But
And
I think that,
if I may stop, he's
yeah.
correct on that. And I
But-
actually did a show that agreed with him.
Yes, it is
The word
true.
entropy is not a good word, but it's a cool
Decay.
sounding word.
Well, and then I think that the reason that evolutionists have changed their tune on that, they no longer say that evolution is has a direction. They're saying it's not necessarily upward movement, but I would say that open or closed, a lightning bolt or the sun's energy or any kind of input is not going to make an apple stop rotting. It's not going to make a human stop aging. It's not going to make entropy. It's not going to make something evolve upward.
Yes. And we don't have to use thermodynamics or anything else.
Yeah.
Oh, look. Oh, my goodness. Cindy, if John B. joins us, you're welcome to hear. And I think it's important you do hear the other side. Because if you're sharing Young Earth creationism with the next generation, you have to caution them that the stuff we have, there is a push to try to persuade people of a viewpoint. Whereas if we're being scientific, we should be trying to give as balanced a viewpoint and not edit out contrary things. And really the evangelistic motivation is kind of like, no, that's not what we want to do. And so there has been a little bit of tension between me and some of the young earth communities, because I'll say, actually our evidence here is not as good as we'd like. There are problems with the model. They don't want to hear that. They want to fill the pews.
I
and
agree.
people-
And I
and-
wouldn't want to be embarrassed by saying something that was unscientific. I would,
Yeah.
I think truth is going to be on our side, and I don't shy away from it.
Yeah.
And
Because
sometimes we
Yeah.
can, being lay people primarily, we can oversimplify or just plain say something that sounds good and isn't good necessarily.
I mean, this is wonderful that we're getting offers from like Mr. Wilford, and we've known each other a while. He's a geologist, and I'm really honored that they wish to dialogue with us. Because I am very concerned that these kids go to Sunday schools and they're told it's so perfect and evolution's so obvious, and they're just like, wait, let's say these kids are going to be medical doctors or medical researchers or geologists. They go off to secular school and they're going to be confronted with this stuff, and they realize it's not quite as tidy as they've been hearing from the pulpit. They could start to undergo a deconstruction process. And so I asked people like Nathaniel Jeanson and Joe DeWeese, who were young earth creationists growing up. They said, what did your parents do? He said, they exposed us to the other side.
That's what I try to do with my daughter too.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do here.
I have one other.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said that it would require a miracle to go from prokaryote to eukaryote, and I would like to extrapolate that between the kinds as well. Even though Dapper Dino was saying, well, we don't know what a kind is, it doesn't really matter. If you're going to say that evolution is stage by stage going from a small thing to a big thing, or from an amoeba, molecules to man, or whatever, it's going to take a miracle to go between a lemur and an ape, or an ape and a human. It doesn't matter where the kind line is. It's still a miracle. There's no way that you can go between such hugely different things as an amoeba and anything else. Amoebas always stay amoebas. I'm sorry to quote Kent Hovind, but
Yes, I know you're sorry. Well, you'll find someone else you can quote, okay?
And then the way they say, well, of course they remain an amoeba, just like we remain a primate. However, that doesn't hold water, because we don't remain a primate. I mean, we have certain morphological similarities, we have certain genetic similarities, but there's no gradual bridge. There's no gradual progression from one to the other. It's a leap. It's an explosion.
Well, what I would recommend for the science students is, rather than created kinds, and this is something even Dr. Dan will agree, that the major protein families look like an orchard. They look like an orchard. There's
that's what I'm saying. I would contend that all the kinds are like that.
Yes, but the thing is the reason I suggested that is, if you can get even an evolutionary biologist to admit that something else is an orchard, take that, start with it.
Extrapolate, right?
Yeah, you could start to build from that. Dr. Dan and I had a conversation on this channel, and I said, Dr. Dan, this looks like an orchard to me. Do you agree? He said, yeah, because I can't put it through my gene alignments and these hidden Markov models. You end up getting an orchard. You don't get a unified tree. And that was my video that I gave specifically in response to Steve McRae, because I put that on the non sequitur channel. I said, he was saying, well, look at all the problems of Young Earth Creationism. And I said, look at all the problems of evolution. I said, if we're going to teach this fairly, you're going to point out the problems on the side. And I said, this protein orchard is serious to me. You can't, how do these things happen by slow, gradual changes? Even protein biologists will say, no, it can't happen. You have to have just a lot of stuff coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I was extremely, I have to credit Dr. Dan that,
Yeah, that was a big thing.
that was a big thing. And he's, I felt he was being responsible to say that. Of course, he will not invoke the supernatural as quickly as I will. But when I looked at that, I'm just like, yeah, this takes miracles, because I happened to, I studied some of these proteins. I'm just like, yeah, this is, it would take a bigger act of faith to say that this happened by the evolutionary mechanisms than to say it was a miracle. I'm just speaking for myself. So that's why I'm trying to, this is funny. I'm trying to discourage creationists from arguing baraminology in the scientific discussion. Argue protein families first. Argue architectures of like eukaryote, prokaryote, and then we'll start to build to it. We might be able to get a catalog for amoeba to a multicellular animal, but we're not quite there. I want rigorous arguments. You can make rigorous arguments when you're dealing with very specific things like specific proteins. So let me give let me drop the link in the channel here in the chat. This is the next show, our nerd torture session.
No.
Do you want to attend it?
Yeah, I'll see if I can comprehend. Also, I want to respond to what I see on the screen from looks like Mr. Wilford. It's very small print for me, but I'm more than happy to discuss these things.
Yeah, that's very generous, and I will learn a lot from you. And I really look forward to hanging out with you, Mr. Wilford. You and I have gone through some tough times, brother. So, and thanks to John B. And thanks to everyone that dropped in to watch this both live and via recording. And you all are welcome to join our nerd torture session, which is going to start in about 4 minutes. I'll send you, oh yeah, Matt's would point out. Thank you. Thank you. So you're welcome to join that. And Cindy, I'll send you an email. I'll send you an email with the link. Take care. God bless you all. And see some of you in the nerd torture session.
Do you need a different link for that?
Yeah, I'm going to send it to you.
Okay,
so
thanks.
Take care, all.